So here we are, the beginning of July, July 2nd, the day that I'm recording this episode, is the start of the last month that either you or me have to suffer through without any NFL football until March of 2023. Shit, that gave me chicken skin just thinking about it. Chills up and down my spine. I'm extremely excited, and I know you must be because you're clicking on this video. Now you might be wondering, why am I getting started so early? Is it too early to get started on fantasy football research? Nay, my friend, it is not. As a matter of fact, it's the perfect time to get started. Like I said, we're a month away from real NFL football, which means that your fantasy football draft is right around the corner. And are you serious about beating those other idiots in your league? About hoisting your league's trophy this season? About claiming those bragging rights that you so well deserve? I know I am. And you should be as well. Like I said, I'm extremely excited, and I'm more than happy to welcome you back to the Fantasy Football Huddle presented by the Huddle Chat Sports. And as always, it's me, your host, Dallas Clark, also known as Indo as my Nindo, and we're back, bigger, faster, stronger, and better than ever here on the Fantasy Football Huddle. We're getting started early, we're getting cracked off, and we're going to get more finite. We're going to get down to the fine, the nitty-gritty, the real meat and potatoes of the situation, the closer that we get to training camps and things like that. But right now, we're busting open our fantasy football rankings early, and if you haven't done it yet, I implore you, go to your fantasy football app that you like to use. I use ESPN, I use Yahoo, I use Sleeper, I use multiple fantasy apps. Go on your fantasy app right now and look at the rankings. You don't got to do anything. Just kind of look at the top 15 running backs, top 20 wide receivers, top 10 quarterbacks. And it might take you aback. It might surprise you a little bit just to kind of see how the world has evolved. But that's the great thing about fantasy football. It's always adapting. It's always changing. I mean, look at Todd Gurley. Just a couple years ago was the league winner. He was winning people their entire championships in the playoffs. He was well regarded as running back one. A couple years later, he's not even in the league. The game is constantly evolving, and like I said, some of those rankings coming into this season might surprise you. I know they shocked the shit out of me, but today we're going to be talking about a couple of those players whose early rankings might really surprise you. We're going to dive in deep into why they're ranked the way they are. Of course, after camp and different things like that, when you see how these rookies perform, we're going to start seeing some things changing. We're going to start talking about the different rookies in the draft class, so don't worry about that. That's coming. We're going to break down my top 20 running backs, my top 20 wide receivers. We have a multitude of information coming your way, so buckle in, strap up. It's time to get started on your fantasy season. But of course, before we get started, I got to invite you to do the same thing that we always do here on the Fantasy Football Huddle. Now, there is no peer pressure. If you don't, there's no sweat off your back. There's no sweat off mine. But if you do, I invite you to smoke them if you got them. Let's get it started, and let's get right into the news, baby. Now, like I said, opening up this fantastic show, and like I said, welcome back. Welcome back, baby. I'm back, baby. I had to say that one time, and I had to say it louder for the people in the back. If you do like the content and you want to see more of this Fantasy Football Huddle, make sure you hit that like button down at the bottom corner of the screen. And if you do subscribe to the channel, I greatly appreciate it. And make sure you hit that notifications bell so you get notified about all the episodes that come out, so that way you can get that edge above those other idiots that are in your league. Now, like I said, we're going to be breaking down some of those early rankings that really kind of, took me a little bit by surprise coming into these early rankings. We got a couple running backs, a couple wide receivers, and I got a tight end that, is kind of really surprising me. We're going to dive in deep on their specific rankings and why they are where they're at. To kick things off, we're going to start with the most important position in fantasy football. That's going to be the running back position. One of the running backs, like we were talking about Todd Gurley earlier, who has seemingly fell from grace. It's going to be the New York Giants' Saquon Barkley. I mean, enough has been said about his, once-in-a-generation talent, his athleticism, his elite running back capability. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to see it. He has been riddled with injuries throughout his early parts of his career. His rookie season was amazing, but ever since then, he's struggled with some injuries, and right now he's 2 years removed from that ACL. And if you know what we like to do around here, we typically like to stay away from players in their first year coming back from an injury like that. But coming into their second year, we typically love to attack those kind of players. Right now, Saquon Barkley is going at running back 17, if that does surprise you. He's been a top 5 running back out every year that he's not been injured. So it's surprising to see him outside of the top 15 of running backs. But I'm going to tell you why it makes sense. You look at the New York Giants, just the plain and simple fact that they got a new GM. They got their new head coach, Brian Daboll. He was the offensive coordinator down in Buffalo. And that Buffalo Bills offense had scored a lot. And that gives you high hopes for Saquon Barkley. But at the end of the day, we're here trying to predict the future based upon what we've been given and what we've seen over history. And you're looking at the New York Giants offense over the past 2 seasons have been a bottom 2 offense in offensive points per game. The scoring opportunity is not there for Saquon Barkley, and that's one of the main keys that we need in a RB1. You're also looking at the fact that they boast a bottom 3 offensive line in the league, one of the worst offensive lines in the entire NFL. That's not something that you want for your running back. Now, you do know Saquon Barkley does get a lot of yards coming out of the passing game, but you pay attention to the fact that Saquon is yet to be elite without Peyton Manning at quarterback. That's something that I'm definitely paying attention to. Daniel Jones, I mean, whether you look at the injuries, you look at the different styles of offense that they had with their previous offensive coordinators, previous head coaches, and you can blame it on that. But the fact that Saquon Barkley has never been elite without Eli Manning at the helm makes me a little bit hesitant on Saquon Barkley. Now, you also look at who his running mate Devontae Booker was last season. Now, you look at the games in which both running backs were able to get over 50% of the carries. Saquon Barkley had 10 of such games. Booker only had 5 of those games. In those 5 games, Devontae Booker put up 4 games where he had over 14 points per game in fantasy football. Saquon Barkley had only 3, despite playing twice as many games where he gets over 50% of the carries and most of the attention. Saquon Barkley has a ton of red flags and is not something that you're looking for in RB1, which is kind of giving him his current ADP right now, which is going to be about a high-level, mid-level RB2. His ceiling is high. Now, you could definitely hope Saquon Barkley blows up this year and returns to what he was like in his rookie season. But hope and faith is not going to win you your season. So Saquon Barkley, I'm definitely taking some hesitation on. I definitely would not take him over some of those elite wide receivers, some of those league-winning wide receivers. Now, speaking of league-winning wide receivers, you're looking at Cooper Kupp from the Los Angeles Rams heading into his second season with Matthew Stafford at wide receiver number 1 this year. It's a definitely high jump. Definitely his career high, of course, but an extremely high jump over where we were just drafting him last year. He was an elite level wide receiver, top 15 going into last year's fantasy football drafts. But Cooper Kupp right now is the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy football, and it really shouldn't shock you. You look at what Cooper Kupp was able to do last season with Odell Beckham Jr. before Odell Beckham Jr. came on the team, with or without Robert Woods, in the woods, on the beach, on a mountain. It doesn't matter. That man is good at football. And Cooper Kupp is a league winner. A league winner is a person that can average about 21 points a game week by week in fantasy football. And you look at what Cooper Kupp did last season, and he averaged 20.5 points per game every week in fantasy football. I mean, that is a league winner in my eyes. And you look at the fact that he did it all not just with touchdown numbers. He won the receiving triple crown, so it was all there. His catches, his yards, his touchdowns. He's an all-around wide receiver, and he gives you everything that you want in a wide receiver. Yes, he could be a little bit bigger, but Cooper Kupp is special, and there's no doubt about it that he's going to be the number 1 wide receiver going into fantasy football drafts. Personally, it all depends on where you land in that first round. If you get one of those later picks, I would not be mad at all at taking wide receiver. As a matter of fact, this season is one of the very first seasons in fantasy football for me that I've had more than 2 wide receivers in the first round on my draft board. I mean, there's a lot of elite wide receivers, and a lot of the running back numbers, especially with how the league has changed with the passing, running back numbers just aren't the same. You have those top few running backs that will give you that elite production constantly, week by week. But then you look at the wide receivers, I mean, looking all the way down at, wide receiver 30, they're putting up about the same numbers as running back 10 through 20 on a week-by-week basis. So you're definitely a little bit more stacked at the wide receiver position, and Cooper Kupp is leading that race. Now, moving back into the running back position, we're going to be talking about another running back's rank that surprised me a little bit. It's going to be Ezekiel Elliott from the Dallas Cowboys. Zeke, feed the beast. We all know who Ezekiel Elliott is. Would it surprise you to know that Ezekiel Elliott is coming into this season at running back 18 in most drafts? I mean, it kind of shocks you a little bit considering the fact, same thing with Saquon Barkley, that he's been a top 5 running back, that he is an Iron Man, and he doesn't miss games. You look at the fact that, unlike Saquon Barkley, he has one of the best offensive lines in the league. However, Zeke is coming off yet another season of disappointing running back efficiency numbers. You're looking at the fact that the Dallas Cowboys last season, with as much scoring opportunity as they presented Ezekiel Elliott, and that's the one thing that kind of makes Ezekiel Elliott somewhat tantalizing, is the high-powered offense surrounding him is going to put him into a lot of scoring opportunities. But you look at the fact that over the last 2 seasons, Ezekiel Elliott has finished as a top 12 running back in only 35% of games. Ezekiel Elliott has just not been performing. You can say 2 seasons ago, you had the Dak injury, and that was kind of expected in Zeke's numbers. But last season, I argue to say that there was no excuse for Ezekiel Elliott to put up those disappointing numbers. Is this the year that Ezekiel Elliott can come back to that running back 1 status? I believe so. He has an extremely high ceiling. Like I said, he's an Iron Man. That boy does not miss time. He's great. He's very durable. He's a great runner in the backfield, and he's a great pass catcher out of the backfield. Zeke just has to be more efficient. He has to maximize his opportunities. But you also look at the fact that Ezekiel Elliott last season put up an average number about the same as wide receiver 29 in fantasy football. I'm not taking Ezekiel Elliott over some of those elite league-winning wide receivers. Same story as Saquon Barkley. If you remember, Saquon Barkley is pick 17 at running back. Zeke is pick 18 at running back. So they're right behind each other. I would definitely not pick Ezekiel Elliott over some of those league-winning wide receivers, but I do think that Ezekiel Elliott has the opportunity to be bigger than Saquon Barkley this year for sure. That's one of my season-long predictions, is that Ezekiel Elliott does have a better season in fantasy football than Saquon Barkley. I do think 100% that Ezekiel Elliott is going to beat his ADP, meaning he's not going to finish at running back 18. He will finish higher than running back 18. So you take Ezekiel Elliott expecting the fact that he may put up mid-level RB2 numbers, but you hope for the fact, you look at his ceiling and you see that he can definitely put up that RB1 production and be a top 10 running back again. I definitely am a little surprised at Ezekiel Elliott's numbers and his rankings right now, but it makes sense based upon what Zeke has done with what he's been given over the past few years, and there's not been an injury unlike Saquon Barkley. Now, going back on into the pass catchers today, I'm looking at DK Metcalf from the Seattle Seahawks. His ADP really shocks me just with how the current situation is looking. I don't think DK Metcalf should be nearly as high as he is. In fact, I think he has one of the most disrespectful ADPs going into the early rankings in the season. Right now, DK Metcalf is going at wide receiver 18. Even this, like I said, I think it's too high of a price to pay for DK Metcalf if you consider the fact that that's going to be going in the 3rd round. You consider the fact that in 2021, he had 14 games where he put up 65 yards or less. Now, you do add in the fact that made him a little bit usable last season, that he put up 12 touchdowns, and that's great, but it is hard to chase consistent touchdown production. Will he put up that same 12 touchdowns again this season? I highly doubt it. You also look at the fact that weeks 10 through 15 last season, he failed to put up more than 60 yards or score a touchdown. And as a fantasy football fan, fantasy football player, you know weeks 10 through 15, you're either vying for a playoff spot or fist fighting for your life in the middle of the playoffs. That's no time for your wide receiver 1 or your wide receiver 2 even to be putting up 6 points per game. That's absolutely outrageous. You also look at the fact that Seattle Seahawks, they look destined to be bottom 5 in points scored and yards gained this season. I forgot to mention that Drew Lock or Geno Smith are going to be at quarterback this year. No more Russell Wilson. He's in Denver, and that's going to be something we're definitely going to be diving into here soon. Keep a lookout for the NFL free agency recap coming here in the next few days. But going back on DK Metcalf, like I said, you're looking at Drew Lock or Geno Smith at quarterback. Drew Lock and Geno Smith have a big enough sample size that you see that Drew Lock, I believe, has been 24 touchdowns in 20 games that he started. And in 34 games that Geno Smith has started, he's thrown 30 touchdowns. I mean, you're looking at the touchdown numbers are not there for either one of those, especially compared to Russell Wilson. Now let's look at another factor that makes me kind of hesitant on DK Metcalf. His running mate, Tyler Lockett, on the opposite side of the field in the wide receiver position, has about identical numbers as DK Metcalf as far as receiving and targets over the last 2 seasons. However, Tyler Lockett has outscored DK Metcalf over the last 2 seasons. DK Metcalf has been a great big size, and I'm not saying he's going to be a terrible player, but I think wide receiver 18 is too expensive for me to go on DK Metcalf. I'm personally staying away from him unless he falls to me way lower than that. Now moving on to another pass catcher, talking in the tight end position. One person whose ranking surprised me a little bit is Mark Andrews. I mean, you do look at the fact that Mark Andrews finished last season as tight end number 1. Now, he's going right now at tight end number 2, just right behind George Kittle, or Travis Kelce. He's above George Kittle. He's above Kyle Pitts. He's above Darren Waller. He's going in at tight end number 2, and then we're looking at a 3rd round ADP right now on Mark Andrews. And even if Mark Andrews hits tight end 1 again, becomes the best tight end in football, it's not going to be nearly the same point production that you got from him last season. You look at the fact that last year, he got 200 more targets than he received the year prior. You look at the fact that the Baltimore Ravens boosted their passing rate to 56% from 46% or less over the last 2 seasons. They've been primarily a running team, and Baltimore boosted their passing rate out of necessity last year. Don't forget, J.K. Dobbins and other running backs for the Baltimore Ravens last year went out early. So very early in the season, the Baltimore Ravens established the fact that they were going to have to be a passing team and change their identity. So I'm looking over at Mark Andrews, and I'm expecting his numbers to regress kind of towards his 2019-2020 season, where he can still be a good tight end. He can still be a top 5 tight end or even the best tight end in the league. But I'm not chasing the same production that I got from him last year. I believe that the Baltimore Ravens are going to go back to a running identity that they've been known for. You look at the records that they've broken in the rushing categories. The Baltimore Ravens' identity at the current moment is a running team, and they've only got their running backs back and healthier since last season. So Mark Andrews is definitely going to see a significant dip in his production. Last player who I want to dive in today, whose ADP and whose current position kind of surprised me, was Elijah Mitchell. Right now, Elijah Mitchell is going at running back 24, and I personally think Elijah Mitchell should be going a little bit higher in drafts. You look at the fact that last season, of course, the San Francisco 49ers was one of the most frustrating running back by committees. You look at the fact that the San Francisco 49ers have now lost Raheem Mostert, JaMycal Hasty, Jeff Wilson have all gone in free agency, and only Trey Sermon remains. They did draft another rookie running back last season, but you look at the fact that at the end of the day, Elijah Mitchell is just flat out better at football than Trey Sermon. Kyle Shanahan loves him some Elijah Mitchell. They're in a high-powered offense that's going to offer them a lot of scoring opportunity. I'm looking at Elijah Mitchell, especially early in the season, as the premier back in San Francisco, and I find his upside very Aaron Jones-esque. I see him to have that similar kind of volume, kind of upside, and I see Elijah Mitchell as a potential top 20 running back easily. He can even sneak into that top 15, just depending on how the San Francisco 49ers go and how their offense changes behind Trey Lance. But I do think Elijah Mitchell should be going a little bit higher. I know that the rookie running back did kind of lower his stake a little bit, kind of made it a little bit more cloudy, but I think that Elijah Mitchell is going to be the premier back, especially early and often in that San Francisco 49ers offense. Now, that's going to be it for today's players whose early rankings might shock you and might surprise you. Like I said earlier, make sure you stay tuned. We're coming heavy and often with these episodes, and they're not going to stop. They're just going to be coming more and more rapidly as we approach your fantasy football draft. My goal is to help you win your fantasy football league, and this is the year that we do it. Thank you so much for spending your time here with me today on the Fantasy Football Huddle, presented by the Huddle Chat Sports Show. As always, I'm your host, Dallas Clark. Indo is my Nindo, and I cannot thank you enough for coming back. If you stayed this long, please drop a like. Hit me with a subscription. I appreciate it, and it does more than you even realize. But I'm going to get up out of here. Let me stop yelling at y'all. And y'all have a great rest of your day. I'll see you in the next video. Peace. Thank you.